already late. Kindly welcome on stage Mander, Ruchira Gupta and Mudar Patherya to discuss the Republic of Hope. And those interested in the Western Quadrangle session, I'm on my way there. Thank you so much.
Can we start? Welcome to the session, Mr. Mander, Ruchira Gupta, Ruchira, Calcutta girl. Harsh साहब, we give you honorary citizenship. आप भी हमारे ही हैं.
बिल्कुल.
शुरू करते हैं. To set a contextual landscape about what we intend to speak is essentially about whether there is hope in this country or not. Harsh साहब, going to ask you a very pointed question. कितनी बुरी situation है? How dismal, despondent and pessimistic is the scenario?
In my new book called Looking Away, Inequality, Prejudice and Indifference in New India, I've talked about a great deal that worries me about where we stand today in India. I've talked about, I see myself as somebody actually 100 years from now, if I was a historian writing about India today, how would I see it? And I say that there are two things that worry me most deeply. The first of them is what I call inequality with indifference. It's not simply, a huge 800 million people getting left behind, living with completely unacceptable levels of hunger and, without decent, any kind of decent life in very exploitative conditions. But more importantly, a situation in which people of privilege have learned to see and look away. The indifference to suffering and injustice around us.
Which is the bigger problem? The inequity or the indifference?
No, it is certainly the indifference. It is the fact that, it's not just the growing inequality that worries me, which Piketty and all are talking about rightly, but it is a normative framework within which we feel it is okay. That worries me. And the other thing that worries me hugely is in the second part of my book is what I call the normalization or the legitimization of prejudice. And I talk
legitimization of prejudice.
Yes. From my childhood, I'm sure people had, say, prejudices about Muslims or about Dalits, but they were not things that you would talk about or flaunt. Today, there's a certain acceptance of extreme prejudice in the way that we look and describe people like the Muslims among us, and a whole sort of mythology has been created around their adherence to violence, or there's a certain specific sort of construction of the Muslim and of the Dalit. I think Ruchira will also talk about Rohit, and I think the important thing for me about Rohit's suicide was it was a reminder of what it feels to be a person from a Dalit background, a child or a young person in a mixed group. So we're building toilets, for instance, in schools across the country. Most toilets, teachers are still asking Dalit children to clean them. So what would it feel to be a Dalit child being asked by your teacher to clean the toilet in front of your, the feeling of being a somewhat reduced citizen and the acceptance of it. And the last thing I'd like to say is that, there's a person called Akhil Gupta who tried to calculate how many people die in India every year of completely avoidable causes. And he came up with a figure of 2 million. Now to put
20 lakh.
20 lakh. And to put that figure in perspective, the number of people who died in the Great Bengal famine was 3 million. So we're seeing the equivalent of a Great Bengal famine happening around us year after year, and we don't see and we don't care.
Get it. So to encapsulate exactly what you said inequity की बहुत बड़ा जो फासला है देश में, that's the first villain. Secondly, the complete acceptance of the extremism that's actually floating around in this country. Ruchira, how much do you agree, or do you have your own perspective of exactly what's wrong with this country?
No, I agree with Harsh on the fact that we've normalized the inequality and our attitudes and behavior allow it to persist. So we do not want to address it. In my own work, where I work among the most marginalized last girls and women who are trafficked for prostitution or who have to choose prostitution because they have no other choices, I have seen this normalization of inequality, especially in Brahminical debates by elite policymakers who want to talk about the exploitation of women as work and say that we should call the prostituted woman sex worker. It totally takes away the fact that, prostitution was an absence of choice for her. It should never be work for her. And the state must invest in what I call the last girl. And the last girl in Hindi, I've coined a new term called the Antyaja. And the Antyaja comes from Dr. Ambedkar's Antaj, the last born. Gandhiji's Antyodaya, the uplift of the last, which he got from John Ruskin's book, Unto the Last, the weakest person that we know in society. And Ja, I've added on to make sure that people realize it's the poor female low caste girl who's the most marginalized. And we have normalized the marginalization of her to such an extent that we don't blink an eye when budgets are being cut for her midday meals, for her school uniforms, for boarding schools for her, but we want to legalize her pimping and brothel keeping. And we want to say, oh, she chose sex work just because, after she was starving and to feed her mother, she may, or to stop her father from selling his kidney, she may end up in a brothel. So I feel that there is definitely a normalization of inequality, and I totally agree with Harsh on that. I think also the problem is how we address the inequality is the second despair that I have. But so before we move on to that, I do want to read a poem by a student who just committed suicide. His name was Rohit. It's like a poem to me. Actually, it's his suicide note which he read. And my despair and hope both come from that. And I really do want to share it with the audience, which may have actually read it in the newspapers already, but I want this festival to mark this. Rohit's letter before he commits suicide. I would not be around when you read this letter. Don't get angry on me. I know some of you truly cared for me, loved me, and treated me very well. I have no complaints on anyone. It was always with myself I had problems. I feel a growing gap between my soul and my body. And I have become a monster, a writer of science, like Carl Sagan. At last, this is the only letter I'm going to write. I always wanted to be a writer, like Carl Sagan. I love science, stars, nature. But then I love people, without knowing that people have long since divorced from nature. Our feelings are second-handed. Our love is constructed. Our beliefs colored. Our originality valid through artificial art. It has become truly difficult to love without getting hurt. The value of a man was reduced to his immediate identity and nearest possibility, to a vote, to a number, to a thing. Never was a man treated as a mind, as a glorious thing made up of star dust in every field, in studies, in streets, in politics, and in dying and living. I'm writing this kind of letter for the first time. My first time of a final letter. Forgive me if I fail to make sense. My birth is my fatal accident. I can never recover from my childhood loneliness. The unappreciated child from my past. Maybe I was wrong in understanding love, pain, life, death, in understanding the world. There was no urgency, but I always was rushing, desperate to start a life. All the while, some people, for them, life itself is a curse. My birth is my fatal accident. I can never recover from my childhood loneliness, the unappreciated child from my past. I'm not hurt at this moment. I'm not sad. I'm just empty, unconcerned about myself. That's pathetic, and that's why I'm doing this. People may dub me as a coward and selfish or stupid once I'm gone. I'm not bothered about what I'm called. I don't believe in after death, stories, ghosts, or spirits. If there's anything at all I believe that I can travel to the stars and know about the other worlds. If you, who is reading this letter, can do something for me, I have to get 7 months of my fellowship, 1,75,000 rupees. Please see to it that my family is paid that. I have to give some 40,000 to Ramji. He never asked them back, but please pay that to him from that. Let my funeral be silent and smooth. Behave like I just appeared and gone. Do not shed tears for me. Know that I'm happy dead than being alive. From shadows to the stars. Uma Anna, sorry for using your room for this thing. To ASA family, sorry for disappointing all of you. You love me very much. I wish all the very best, the future. For one last time, Jai Bhim. I forgot to write the formalities. No one is responsible for this act of killing myself. No one has instigated me, whether by their acts or by their words, to this act. This is my decision. I am the only one responsible for this. Do not trouble my friends and enemies on this after I am gone. And I'm reading this to you today on Republic Day, the day Dr. Ambedkar had written our constitution for someone like him. So this is my despair, but this is also my hope that Dr. Ambedkar wrote the constitution and we have a constitution to move us forward.
Yeah, we'll come to the hope part in a while. Harsh Saab, आपसे ये पूछना है कि it would appear that the scenario is extremely grim and there is really no future. It's getting from bad to worse and it will probably get even worse. Is there any hope?
In moments of sadness, while reading this letter, I had tears and, I've still not recovered from the sadness that India could not save this young man. And he died because of what we are and what we have become. But in moments of sadness of this kind, moments of rage, moments when I'm close to despair, I still see an enormous amount of hope.
Where? What kind?
Many things, most of all, the possibilities of resistance, of courage, of kindness.
Udaharan?
I could tell you a lot of stories, but I'll tell you 2 or 3 in the brief time that I have. In the work that I choose to do, first of all, I'll tell you a story from Gujarat, where in 2002 we saw one of the worst massacres of the kind that we've seen over and over again in 1984, 2002 in Muzaffarnagar, where people are targeted only and only for the crime of the accident, the fatal accident of where they are born. And their faith. So I saw this really brutal massacre. I felt I had to leave the civil service that I was in and to work alongside the survivors. And for a long time, the kind of hate killings that I saw, the rape, the violence, I just couldn't believe that we were capable of this. But what helped me heal was the recognition slowly over time that the numbers of people who actually saved lives in Gujarat were far more than those who took them. And that's the story of Gujarat that we don't tell and we don't remember.
Can you give me one instance of such a story?
I can tell you hundreds, but I'll tell you one. Thuraji, somebody had told me that there was just in a village close to Kuha, village close to Ahmedabad, this man had saved 110 Muslims. He sheltered them for 10 days. So I thought he must be some big landlord, and I went to see him. And I found he was a small farmer, very modest. And the Muslims told me the story that had happened was that people had set about, their neighbors started burning their houses and drove them out, and they went and hid in the fields. Night fell, and the 110 of them were hiding in the fields, and they knew this man was kind, and they said maybe till tomorrow morning we'll ask him just for one night's shelter. And they went and knocked on his door, and he said, not one night, you will stay here as long as you need to. And he gathered his entire, joint family, and they guarded him night and day, guarded them. He opened out his entire store of grain, which they have for the year, and fed them for those 10 days, 10 nights. And even in the end, the Muslim people told me that they insisted that let us go to a relief camp. How long can we stay here? And even after, they went to the camp, he used to come there and he used to see their children in the camp and used to weep for them. So when I met him, I asked him and his wife, I said, why did you do this? And he was very embarrassed, that I thought it was something very special. And then he said, how could I bear it that people of my village are treated this way? And then he added, this village belongs to Muslims as much as it belongs to me. And I long to hear in those years my friends tell me that this country belongs to Muslims as much as it belongs to me. I said, you must have been at least scared, because they set fire to his fields, part of his house, and so on. And he said, his wife illusion that Thakurji would reward him for saving 110 Muslim lives. He had no confusion. I don't know where, in all our education, we are so confused. So that's one story. I'll tell you two other small stories, and maybe that would, another part of my work is with homeless people. And homeless people sleeping, really difficult lives. In cold winter nights of the kind we have in Delhi, a set of entrepreneurs have come up who actually hire out blankets at 30 rupees a night. And I've seen, homeless people really have to choose between that last meal and getting a blanket. And it's a difficult choice. One night it occurred to me that the really destitute among, old people, disabled people, widow alone, etc., they always had blankets. So I wondered, how did that happen? And then I asked them, and they said, again, very matter-of-factly, they said, but we know that they would die in a single night. So when we gather in the evening, we first pool money between ourselves to hire blankets for these old people. Then if there's something left for ourselves, we do it. So again, I thought, what the government should be doing and is not doing, what NGOs should be doing and not doing, what the entrepreneur should be doing and not doing. Our most poor and the most destitute
lowest common denominator.
Yeah, if you have to really learn, I've said this in my book, if you really want to learn what giving is, look for those who have nothing and see how much they can give. And the last story, and I'm sorry, and I won't take much time after that, but because this is about a republic of hope, these are the people from where, I work also on hunger, and there's a community called the Saharias which has starvation deaths all the time, and I've been looking at it as a commissioner to the Supreme Court. So actually, I'd seen the first set of large-scale starvation deaths in a particular village, and I realized suddenly that it was 10 years later. This was 2002, and then it was 2012, 13, I think. And then I decided to go back to that first family and see what was happening. And I talked to them, and some life had changed. I mean, the children told me very innocently that I said, how many days do you sleep hungry? And they said 4 days or so in a month. Earlier it was 10 days, so maybe we've made some progress. I don't know if that's progress enough. Anyway, while this whole conversation, and they were in bondage labor, etc. So this young boy, the son, about 14, 15, was sitting and listening very carefully while we were talking. So I asked him, at some point I said, "Bete, kya kar rahe ho?" He said, "I'm in school." And then I said, "No, but I saw that the government school hardly functions." So he said, no, I've gone to a private school. So I said, "Oh, but how much are the fees?" He said 2,500 rupees a year, which is not much, but for a person who's the son of a bonded laborer. I said, "Where did you get the 2,500 rupees?" So he said, "I put myself in partial bondage. And 5 days...
Partial bondage.
5 days in a month, they can call me and the school knows I will go. But the rest of the time, I study and I'm in class 10. So I asked him, I said, "Bete, jab aap bade honge, when you grow up, what do you want to do?" And he said, looked me in the eye and he said, "Jo aap kar rahe hain, so main karna chahta hu. What you do, I will do." So I said, "What do you think I do?" So he said, "I'm not really sure."
How old was the child?
He was about 15. He said, "I'm not sure what you do, but I know you are worried about people who are in hunger and in bondage. And jo aap kar rahe hain, so main karna chahta hu." And I mean, there's no way that I cannot have hope when I look into the eyes of a boy like Ashok, who has nothing, who is in bondage himself, his father is in bondage, and yet he dreams, and he dreams of
giving,
of making the world better.
Fantastic. Ruchira, how much do you agree? Hope?
I'm a hopeaholic, and that's why I'm an activist, because I believe that action can make things better. And in my own work, which hasn't been for very long, just 18 years on the issue of sex trafficking, I found that change has happened for the better. Prostitution was considered inevitable. There were no laws around it. People would tell me that men will be men, prostitution is the oldest profession. Now nobody tells me that. They say, no, men who buy sex are weird. They should not be buying sex. And, men who don't get sex know how to do without sex. In fact, most of the men I know live without sex. It's not that they are walking around like predators to pick up any woman. And so that attitude of men has changed. So I see hope in that. I also see hope in the fact that nobody thinks prostitution is inevitable. Out of the 110 countries that I've been working with, in 40 countries, laws have changed around prostitution, where now women in prostitution are not punished, but the traffickers are punished and the pimps and the johns are punished. So customers are punished. So the blame has shifted from the victim to the perpetrator. And in my own country, I find hope in the women's movement, which is global. So I have a family of birth. My parents are sitting here. But I also have a family of choice. And I truly believe that the two of you who are men are part of my family of choice. And it's huge, this belief of people who believe in social justice, who believe in ending hunger, who believe in equality.
Is it growing?
It's growing. It's growing. I can go to any country in the world today and find a comrade. I can phone someone and say, I'm Ruchira and I'm here. And they'll say, oh, we know about you as an activist. Come and have a cup of tea. There's a bed waiting for you wherever I go. Today, Rachel Moran was here from Ireland just to support my work against prostitution by speaking up to a Calcutta audience about what the experience of prostitution is like. So, there's a commonality in our inequality in the world. And the fact that the women's movement is fighting it together across borders, across boundaries, across countries, is that Republic of Hope. Because the Republic is not limited just to India. The Republic of Hope cuts across countries. It's the Republic of Hope. It cuts across countries, and it's the republic that all of us activists inhabit, because we dream, and dreams are a form of planning. Not the McKinseys, not the consultants. Our dreams are the forms of planning.
Can you repeat that? I think it might just be lost on the audience. I want you to repeat the fact that all us activists belong to this Republic of Hope. Can you just repeat that?
Yeah.
And intone it slowly. Let the audience grasp exactly what you're saying.
So I just told Mudar that I believe that the Republic of Hope exists across the world. It's the republic to which all of us activists belong, who believe in change. And it doesn't require a visa. Anyone can join. All of you can join. And in that we dream. And I really believe that dreams are a form of planning. Not the McKinseys, not the consultants who come and tell us, do it like this and put us into an Excel sheet or a box. Ultimately, you dream something and then you make it happen. Yeah, so dreams are the best form of planning.
When the Sahara boy dreamed, he'd already changed the world.
Absolutely. So I really believe that. And in my own country, after the 16th December bus rape, which was so brutal, the hope was in the fact that within 3 months, students were out marching on the streets. And they were girls as well as boys. And I remember we were fighting with the boys when we were protesting, saying, we want to be water cannoned. It's our movement. So you all go at the back. And we pushed the boys to the back. And they were allowed to take photographs. And in 3 months, we got a new law. April 3rd, 2013, we got a new law, and that doesn't happen anywhere in the world so fast. So the scale of the Indian experiment, the fact that India responds to people's movements so fast, that is the democratic thread in India, which starts from the bottom and transform at the top, which Gandhiji gave us. And my hope is that that thread stays through all of it like a river, which runs, underground like the Saraswati or whatever river we like to believe in, the river of hope. So we have that, and we can hold on to that. We are very unique in the world, and we offer hope to the world. So we should not become like the rest of the world, a militarized, angry, aggressive, killing, full of hatred republic. Let us continue to be that Republic of Hope, which starts at the bottom and transforms at the top.
Super. Harsh Saab, I'm going to be a devil's advocate of sorts. ये जो आपने वाक़या बताया, for instance, a young 15-year-old, I would say it's just 1 in a million. This probably doesn't happen everywhere. Do you think this entire movement towards a better republic has got adequate critical mass in a country like this?
I think it has a critical mass beyond the social class to which we belong. Within our social class, I think we need to reflect.
The problem is our social class.
I think we are the problem.
Fantastic.
And we need to start slowly becoming part of the solution. I've just, day before yesterday, I was in a leprosy colony with which I've been associated. This is a set of leprosy patients who were reduced to begging. In the first place, I was posted as a young subdivision magistrate called Barwani. And we set up a village called Ashagram, and I go back there. Now it's about 35 years. And I was just sitting with the leprosy patients. They still had their stubs. All of them have given up begging. And I was talking about their children's children now. And, they've struggled so hard. And they talked about 3 of them have become engineers.
Wow.
1 of them has passed her PSC exam. There is no way, and they've done it despite all of us, despite our prejudice, despite our resistance. 10 of them have become nurses. But let me say something a little more. I remember there are moments when, especially in the climate of hatred, and we'll be talking about intolerance, I think, later this afternoon in another panel. But there is certainly a certain climate that has got created where people of the minority communities are feeling more and more threatened, more and more despairing at certain points. I have a lot of young colleagues who happen to be Muslim, and I remember there was a young man called Faraz. This was just after the Yaqub Menon hanging, and I found that I was seeing his body language. It was like a clinical depression. He was really slipping into a personal sense of despair. So I sat him down. I said, "Son, what is it that is troubling you so much?" And he said, a terrorist is caught and due process, and he's hung. I have no problem at all. But the way this was done, where it seemed like the president, the prime minister, the chief justice had all decided that he should not be hung on a particular day, and whatever. I mean, and let's not debate about what happened there. But he said that at that moment, I realized that however much I love my country, I will always be a minority. Then he went on, he said, I feel this over and over again. We had the only television set in our colony, and all my friends used to come and watch cricket. And there was this India-Pakistan match, and when Pakistan won, my friends turned to me and said, "Oh, you must be very happy." And he said, I was a small child, I couldn't even understand what they were saying. Then he said, and I realized I was a minority. And then he said, when my beard grows a little, my mother rings me up from Azamgarh, desperately saying, "Bete, cut your beard, otherwise somebody might pick you up." Then I feel like I'm a minority. And so he went on. And I said, son, I understand what you're feeling. I understand everything that you're saying. But on one thing, I totally disagree with you. And he said, what? And I said, I disagree with you when you say that you belong to a minority in this country. And why I say that I disagree is that I believe that in this country, the battle never was, never is, or never will be a battle between Hindus and Muslims. The battle has always been between people who misuse religion to create hatred and division between us and difference, and between those who follow their respective faiths and still respect the faith of others. Please remember that the 2 persons who, during our freedom struggle, were, gave their most for the secular idea of India. One of them was Mahatma Gandhi, who lived for many ideas, but he died for that idea, and Maulana Azad. Both of them were deeply devout in their own faith, and
one was born in Mecca.
Absolutely. And the 2 men who fought most for a religious state, Muhammad Ali Jinnah was not a practicing Muslim most of his life, ate beef and ate pork and so on. And Savarkar, who was a self-professed atheist. So I find it extraordinary that the people who fought for a religious state were irreligious, the people who fought for the secular idea of India were deeply devout in their own faith. There has to be. So I told him, I said, for me, the battle is not between Hindus and Muslims. The battle is between those who misuse religion for hatred, and the battle on those who learn to follow their own faith and respect those of others. And I believe that the former is a small minority in this country. The latter is the majority.
And that's the hope that you're talking
and
about.
you and I both belong to that majority. And that is why I have hope. And this plays out in, you're saying, where's the empirical? Gujarat had happened a year after. Godhra was the epicenter of that whole violence, as we know. And with this, the survivors in Gujarat were terrified because a man called Praveen Tagolia was planning to come on the first anniversary and do what is called a Trishul Diksha. This is to distribute Trishuls in a really hateful climate. And they started emptying out, all the Muslims started emptying out of the colonies. They were terrified about what was going to happen on that first anniversary. And we tried, the government of course refused to ban it, and the program was going ahead. Suddenly one of my colleagues, I didn't have the idea, colleagues had an idea, okay, let's do a parallel program on the same day. We'll call it a Gulab Diksha. And we will say that we are also offering at another part of the town rose flowers for those who believe in love and tolerance. And whoever wants to go to the Trishul Diksha is welcome to go there, and those who want to come to the Gulab Diksha are welcome to come here. And this is, this is factually true. At the end, 200 people went for the Trishul Diksha, and about 3,000 came for the Gulab Diksha. So we do belong to this majority. We need to recognize, and that's my hope.
Ruchira, critical mass. Do-gooders versus hopeless. Where is the balance lie according to you?
I'm in agreement with Harsh that people know that doing good is practical and that we need to coexist to evolve. Evolution is basically based on that, and those who don't coexist die. So it's very, very important for us to remember that the majority are practical people. They have empathy for the other person. It's human nature to have empathy. And if you're taught to cut off empathy, you're actually going against your own nature, which is very obvious. And how long can we live with calluses on our skin? So this group of people who are saying they are speaking up on behalf of the majority are actually the minority, the RSS, the Hindutva vadis, who are telling us be intolerant, kill somebody, because we are not going to get more jobs, more homes, better lifestyles by killing somebody. We are going to actually get better jobs, more infrastructure, better homes, better fulfillment of things that we want by working together, because you have a talent and I have a talent, and we can pool that talent and value add, and that is what India has shown to the world. As I mentioned to you, I've worked in 40 different countries, and the best of India has come out of people working together through cultures. So our food, biryani, our gulab jamun, our rasgulla has all come from different cultures. Our music, the sitar. So we have to understand, even our textile weaving tradition and chapai tradition has come from Iran. Sanskrit was found first in Syria. So, we have to understand that what we value comes from composite cultures. And if we divide up the cultures, we'll have nothing left. And it'll be a wasteland. And Yugoslavia broke up into countries so fast when hatred was fueled that nobody gained. Neither the Serbs, nor the Bosnians, nor the Muslims, nor the Christians. Yugoslavia just became 6 different countries. So if we want that for India, we have to think very carefully that do we want to be left just with a wasteland? And this debate about tolerance and intolerance can go even further, because we can think about tolerance as a form of empathy. We don't have to tolerate someone because he's a pain, but we tolerate him. We have to empathize.
Do you think
with
the
that
word
person.
tolerance itself is suspect? Agar acceptance replaces tolerance, I think it would be a better country.
Absolutely. I would prefer in Hindi, actually, where this whole concept came from, was written by ideologue of the Socialist Party called Dr. Ram Manohar Lohia, who wrote an essay called Hindu Banam Hindu, in which he said that for 5,000 years, actually, the battle has been, just as Harsh was talking about, not between Hindus and Hindus, but between empathetic Hindus and Kattarvad Hindus. He said Udarvad and Kattarvad. So orthodox Hindus and fundamentalist Hindus will also be two different. Empathetic Hindus and fundamentalist Hindus will be very, very different people. And we have to decide, do we want to be narrow-minded or do we want to be broad-minded and inclusive? And that is the whole thing. And we have to imagine the other and put ourselves in their shoes so that there's a role reversal. So a man should imagine what it's like to be a woman should imagine what it's like to be a man. Same way a Hindu should imagine what it's like to be a Muslim, and a Muslim a Hindu, and so on. Otherwise, there's going to be no end to it. We will not be able to coexist. And war helps nobody. Nobody.
Harshab, you mentioned that the critical mass is definitely in favor of, the hope, the hopeful.
Absolutely.
Why is it that अखबार के पन्ने जब आदमी पढ़ता है तो ऐसे लगता है कि देश का कोई फ्यूचर ही नहीं है?
Actually, I think that one of our problems is that this large majority is silent too often. We don't speak out enough. We don't battle when we hear prejudice, for instance. We hear hatred being talked about in our drawing rooms. For instance, that's where we need. In the way we raise our children, I think we teach our children inequality very early. I often wonder, when you see you tell a 4-year-old child, "Bete sab badon ka paun chhuo," how does he know at the age of 4 that sab badon mein the domestic help is not included? How does he know at that age that this is one adult I can talk to rudely, I can command, and nobody, we teach a child very quickly. I was speaking in New York University about homelessness, and a professor there, Kim Hopper, he said something very interesting. He said he's been teaching for 30 years, and he asked his student to remember how their parents, introduced them to the idea of a homeless person. So when you're driving down New York and you see these people, obviously a child will get distressed. So how did your parents teach you? What did they teach you? And the predominant memory they have is actually of recoil. You pull your child away, like these are dangerous people out there. So I started asking my students when I teach here, try to recall, and I find that they don't even have a memory. And I think because for a child here, the distress should be even greater when you see a child just your age, begging on the streets, knocking on the window, sleeping on. It should cause huge distress to a child. I think what we teach our children very early is to not care. And I think that's really my biggest problem.
Which is, again, you're coming back to the beginning, the normalization of that.
The normalization and, the empathy that Ruchira keeps talking about. Please remember that empathy is first an act of imagination, and then an act of feeling. But we've created...
Can you repeat that?
For me, empathy is first an act of imagining. What would it be like? And then of feeling. But we've created such separate worlds between Hindus and Muslims, between the rich and the poor. Our children in middle-class households, I think the only poor people we encounter today are people whose job is to serve us. You never encounter them in class, in the cinema, in the places you shop as equals. So that so our capacity to imagine, let alone to feel, has got deeply compromised. And I think that, in my book I talk about the imperative of public compassion. And one of the ideas is of empathy. But the other is also of solidarity. And of what in our constitution is called fraternity. I think, most of us know about liberty, equality, but fraternity, what is fraternity? And Ambedkar used to say that it was the most, talking about our republic today, the most critical of those three values in some way is the idea of fraternity. Now, the Hindi term, I think, is lovely. The Hindi term is actually bandhuta. Bandhuta. It's an ideology of friendship. That we are bound together, we belong with each other, we must take care of each other.
Interconnectedness.
The interconnectedness that I care, if you suffer, it should cause pain to me. I saw in the Gujarat violence, many things terrified me and saddened me. But one of the things that I started going there 2 weeks after it happened, the complete normalcy of one part of the city. It was as if they didn't care. 1 lakh people were in camps, devastated, having lost anything. Another part of the city was just going through life as if...
Which parts of the city? Can you name them?
The old and the new, which is, they use the word border now in Ahmedabad. Border ka is par gaye ya us par. I mean, the Muslim Abadi, the old city and the new city. And it's completely divided, and people just did not care. And I think the breakdown of our capacity, because, there's a guy called Ashish Khaitan, who filmed, he went in as a sympathizer and he started filming secretly in the Tehelka tapes. And they're very frightening to watch, the breakdown of empathy. But the one that I find most frightening is this man called Suresh Chara, who's sitting with his wife in the same visual, and he's bragging about how he raped and pounded Muslim women. And what is frightening is that his wife is nodding in approval while he's speaking. So if you can nod in approval about the rape of another woman, and that too by your own husband, then you have stopped looking at a Muslim woman as a woman. And that is the death of empathy. And that is what allows us to hate and you might think that's a far out idea, but I think in our own homes, when we have one child whom we give everything, and have another child sometimes working in the same home, and studies say that about 20%, 25% of middle class households have underage domestic help, and we don't care, and that child gets nothing, doesn't get an education, doesn't get the same food. I think the death of empathy is similar to what Suresh Richard's wife was showing. When we can see two children, what Rohit talked about, the fatal accident of his birth. All of us in this gathering have actually made one very sensible decision, that we chose our parents well. If we had chosen our parents differently, if we had been born somewhere else, you might have been the person sleeping on the streets outside. That's all that makes you better than that person. And yet we believe that we are the ones, we have accomplished everything. We have what we have because of entitlement. I think that, I think we are not able to distinguish between privilege and entitlement. And when you recognize that what we have, all of us in this gathering have, is not entitlement, it's not something we've earned, it's something that we have because we won our ovarian lottery. It should at least create a sense of humility and responsibility. And I think that's what we've lost.
Ruchira, any thoughts on this? On the one hand, critical mass of hope, जो आपको लग रहा कि है, और फिर भी the general mood of the country is always low, probably exposed to this entire positioning in the media that the country is going to the dogs. It's been going to the dogs for the last 67, 68 years.
Actually, I don't think the country has been going to the dogs, और मुझे नहीं लगता कि मूड भी इतना लो है, क्योंकि हमारे यहाँ बहुत बड़ा यूथफुल पॉपुलेशन है, नौजवान बहुत हैं और उन लोग बहुत कोशिश कर रहे हैं आगे बढ़ने की. आज
डेमोग्राफिक डिविडेंड,
हाँ, डेमोग्राफिक डिविडेंड है और काम भी है, आपको दिखेगा, क्योंकि आप देखेंगे कि हमारे यहाँ जो लड़कियाँ हैं जो बिहार में हैं, जो साइकिल पे स्कूल जा रही हैं, उन्होंने नीतीश कुमार को वोट दिया है, क्योंकि नीतीश कुमार ने आज रिजर्वेशन किया है औरतों के लिए सारी सरकारी नौकरियों में. तो उनमें होप है और उन लोग को डर नहीं लग रहा कि हमारा भविष्य क्या होगा. उनको पता है कि उनका भविष्य उनकी माओ के भविष्य से बेहतर है. एंड द अदर थिंग इज दैट द मीडिया पीपल हैव बिगन टू इग्नोर द मीडिया नाउ, बिकॉज दे बिगन टू अंडरस्टैंड दैट टाइम्स ऑफ इंडिया विल से दिस एंड NDTV will say this and Aaj Tak will say this. So all of us have developed our own analytical filters, picking what we like from each media and looking at multiple medias, and also depending on social media, which is much more decentralized for information. And one of the things I found is that, for 60 years, one of the RSS, BJP propaganda has been the big fat lie that nothing has happened in India for 60 years. 60 साल में कुछ नहीं हुआ, 60 साल में कुछ नहीं हुआ. तो 60 साल में अगर कुछ नहीं हुआ तो हम सब पढ़ लिख के आज यहाँ कैसे बैठे हैं? हम सब गाड़ियों में आए हैं, हम सबके पास सेल फोन है, हम सबके घर में बिजली है, हमारी जो लाइफस्टाइल है, हमारे माँ बाप से बेहतर है. तो अगर 60 साल में कुछ नहीं होता, जिस बंगाल में आज मैं हूँ वहाँ पर फैमिन हुई थी. Women had to sell their babies to survive. उसके बाद अब हंगर है. We don't have famine in India again. So after what our founding fathers failed to understand was the deeply entrenched inequity and poverty which was left behind after colonization. So they dealt with it somewhat. They may not have dealt with it enough. But definitely we are far, far better off than any country which has been colonized by the British. Seriously, like South Africa.
Are you
or
absolutely sure on this?
Yes, absolutely sure on this. I've worked in the United Nations for 14 years. I've been based in different countries, and we have done a very good job and in trying to work ourselves out of that endemic poverty. We were left behind. You know, people in this generation may not even know, but people say, oh, British prison systems were better. They were not. You just have to go to Andamans. 10 prisoners were jailed together with the same handcuffs sometimes, the same things around their foots with one chain. They had to go to the toilet together. If you read about accounts of 1857, people were hanged from trees all along the Grand Trunk Road. So, you know, there was no, that justice is maybe romanticized now, but it wasn't better. It was the worst form of exploitation. And it created a famine which has been understudied, which we are still trying to get out of. Bengal and Bihar are still sufferers of that famine. And, you know, we have dealt with it and we are still dealing with it and we have a long way to go. But we all have to admit that my father's lifestyle was better than my grandfather's lifestyle, and my brother's lifestyle is better than my father's lifestyle. Same thing with me. Mine is better. I have more rights than my mother, and my mother had more rights than her grandmother. More education, more opportunities. So it's a flippant comment to say 60 saal mein kuch nahi hua. That's a big fat lie. The hope is in the fact that so much has happened and we are now able to do much more. So let's stick with it. Let's not lose patience. Let's tenaciously hang in there. And the people who are feeding us these lies, we have to reject them. Not lose faith in ourselves.
Super. Harsha, would you want to do a roundup of this?
Yeah. You know, I agree fully with Ruchira, but yet I'd like to say, while all of that is true, have we changed fast enough for as many people as we should have? And so when I went to Ashok Saharia's house and the children were saying we sleep hungry 3 or 4 days in a month, when 10 years earlier they were saying we sleep hungry 10 days in a month, that's good, but is that good enough? You know, the bonded labor that his father used to be intergenerational. Now it's an annual bonded labor. Is that enough? I do believe that we have to recognize, and yet we have to have a restlessness for making change happen. And somewhere, I mean, a lot of that also, you know, the kind of when we were battling for the Food Security Act, I remember that week when the bill was being debated. I was on television debates every night trying to defend it. Everybody was angry, including the anchor, and not just the anchor that you're thinking about. Everybody was angry. And you know, one industrialist, she turned to me and she said, I worked hard to make my money. What's wrong with it? I've done nothing to harm the economy. Why should I be taxed to feed the poor? And I think, in a sense, that is what drove me to write this book. You know, I said
that one line
is really what set me off to say why I said the poor work hard, much harder. They've done even less to harm the economy. And in a good society, we must be, we should demand that I should be taxed in order to ensure that somebody a child doesn't have to sleep out there on the streets without it. And
it's complete change in paradigm.
In our paradigms, that's what I call public compassion. But in my roundup, I argue best with stories. So I'll just tell you one last story to explain when I talk about what solidarity of fraternity means. This was again Godhra, and houses had been devastated, etc. And I had this crazy idea. I said that we will try to rebuild homes of the people whose houses were burnt down, but we have ek shart hai, that Hindus and Muslims of that village will have to do shramdan, free labor, in order to rebuild those houses that were destroyed in the carnage. And people said it is impossible. In 80 villages, we got Hindus who agreed to give their voluntary labor. When I was traveling around. It was a hot summer afternoon. I went to one village where I found that they said that there was a Hindu widow who was very poor. Her husband died and there was no money, and so she pulled down her hut and set that on fire with her husband's body, and she had become homeless. So the community there had decided that they would also rebuild her house by this Shramdan. So I was seeing that they were building a house, and there was a Muslim boy with a skull cap, and he was working there. So I just pulled him aside and I said, "Son, why are you doing this?" So he was saying that I was completely without hope. And then, my neighbors had set fire to my house, and, I'd lost everything. I didn't know what the future was. And then this opportunity came to work for this widow, and I'm feeling hopeful again. And then I was leaving, and he pulled my hand and he said, "Main kuch kehna chahta hu." He said, "I want to thank you for this opportunity." And I was saying, this boy, a Muslim boy, is thanking me for the opportunity to work free in the hot sun, to rebuild a Hindu widow's house after Hindus have attacked and killed and so on. I mean, he understood something about solidarity that I think most of us have forgotten.
Super. I'm not going to take any more. आपको मैं इतना कष्ट नहीं दूंगा. I think now they will give you a little more kashт, but they will actually ask you some very trying questions. We leave the floor open to all of you. Attack, or rather just ask Ruchira and Harshi exactly what you... Yes, sir. Can somebody just pass the gentleman a mic?
एक यहाँ से माइक ले लें.
I don't mind giving my mic. Sir, can you just pass? Another? Thank you.
My name is Ashish. Thank you very much for sharing your thoughts. I have two questions, one for Ruchira and one for Harsh. The first one is straightforward. Ruchira, you can think about it. How can empathy be resurrected if it is dead?
Can you speak closer to the mic?
How can empathy be resurrected if it is dead? If at all it can be resurrected? You can think about it.
Super.
Next.
We'll just come back to you as soon as you answer.
Okay. And the second question is a little bit more complex, and it is emanating from the fact that once I was trying to put cause and effects of what is wrong and what everything is wrong, the whole canvas of wrongs which is in India, and it brought me to absence of an effective justice system as the root cause of all. I want to understand from you if you see it that way. If not, why? And if not, what do you think is the most important root cause causing or impacting most of the things which is wrong with our society? These are the two questions. Thank you.
Okay. Right through my life, when I've seen an injustice, I've tried to look at how we can, make a law, make a policy to change it. And I do think the failures of our justice system are critical in the way that we've normalized many of the injustices that I talked about. What happened? Today's Hindustan Times, I've actually written an article about a young man who was picked up for 14 years on terror charges, and in the end of 14 years, they finally released him and said he's innocent. But what can give back those 14 years of his life? And he still believes in India's democracy, and he still has hope for India. And they carried it on Republic Day. So, I mean, there is injustice in the way our criminal justice system works. The only difference that that has evolved in my thinking, and I've said this in this book of mine, I've said that, I do still believe that we have to look for a just and caring state. But what I recognize is that a just and caring state can only occur within a just and caring society. And so the problem when we see injustice is not out there alone, it is also here. And I'll just give you one example. When December 16th happened, and it was a very special moment of public empathy, when a woman whose name we didn't know, whose face we didn't know, we felt her pain as if it was our own. And yet I saw the limitations of that that moment as well, because for homeless women on the streets, for instance, we don't have candlelight marches. A homeless woman I worked with said when we created our first shelter that what has changed in her life, she said, after 17 years, I can close my eyes for the first time. I know that no one will rape me through the night. Can you even begin to imagine what that would mean? But I said, you know, all of those limits is there, but can we also have empathy for the boy, the underage boy who committed that rape? And that's a difficult one. Empathy is very different from justifying. And, you know, the boy was, he's the son, his mother was about 13 when she was married to a man who was an undiagnosed schizophrenic. He was born when his mother was 14, the poorest village house in the village. His father was violent, he used to disappear for long periods of time. His mother tried to raise him. At the age of 11, she sent him to the city because he had to earn. He became the principal bread earner at 11. He started sending money home from dhaba work, etc., some 500 rupees. After some years, he slowly got into this destructive adult company and so on. What I wanted, and having worked with these people, if we had reached out to him, he could, even now when he was in the juvenile home, the staff said he became the best boy. He learned to paint. He learned, he learned to cook. He had ideas. But for him, he's still India's most hated. And I said, none of this justifies what he had done. But I think at least let us recognize that what happened in that bus, not only he is guilty, you and I are also guilty for the uncaring society that we have created. So can we recognize our own culpability in the violence? So it's not just the criminal justice system out there. We constitute that criminal justice system. We constitute the state. And we don't believe that the fatal accident of your birth should determine your future.
Yes, so
मैं कोई सवाल नहीं पूछ रहा हूँ, आपसे एक रिक्वेस्ट है कि वो रोहित का लेटर जो है उसे एक बार और पढ़ दें।
वो मैं अपने अलग से बैठ सकते हैं, फिर मैं वापस पढ़ने के लिए तैयार हूँ। जो लोग वहाँ कोने में
मैं चाहता हूँ यहाँ जो लोग बैठे हैं वो उसे एक बार और सुने।
अभी समय नहीं है, इसलिए मैं बाद में आपको सुना दूंगी। पर मेरा एक सवाल था कि कैन होप बी रेसरेक्टेड आफ्टर इट इज़ डेड? होप तो हर पल में रेजरेक्ट हो सकता है, और आज हम लोग साथ में बैठ के इसीलिए एक दूसरे से बात कर रहे हैं क्योंकि हम जानते हैं कि आशा है और तभी हम कुछ काम कर सकते हैं। इनके ऑर्गेनाइजेशन का नाम ही है अमन की आशा। और होप का मतलब क्या है? That we focus on the positive instead of the negative. Every day we have things which are negative around us. And the best way of hoping again is to see, okay, what's working? Where can I help in this? And let me move it along further. What part can I play in it? So I think hope and healing also go together. And we can heal ourselves by healing the other. So let us always, and I'm telling you that you feel you can't do anything in your lives, but you can. Every day think of one outrageous act you can do, one healing act you can do for somebody else. It may be something which will be difficult in the beginning because you won't be able to imagine it. It's the failure of our imagination which all three of us have been talking about. So rekindle your imagination, and the moment you start imagining, you will empathize, and once you empathize, you will figure out a way to do some act of something which will actually heal you, because you will not be helping the other, you will be helping yourself, and from that will come the hope. It's not that, by helping a woman in prostitution, I'm just helping her. My own ability to think, to act, to speak, to find the courage to speak to hundreds of people, to be a leader has been kindled by that. So I've grown as a person. Same thing, I was telling Harsh yesterday that when I was a reporter, I had gone to cover the demolition of the Babri Masjid in 6 December 1992, and I was nearly strangled to death because people thought I was a Muslim. I had a hanky on my head and I was wearing jeans and a shirt. So they tried to kill me, but then they decided not to kill me inside the mosque, and they pulled me out to a trench outside. and a man passing by who had interviewed the day before rescued me and took me to the terrace where all the BJP leaders were, Advani and Pramod Mahajan and all these people, Sadhvi Ritambara. And I actually saw how they orchestrated the demolition of the mosque and the burning of the Muslim houses around me. And till then, I was just a journalist who was very keen on becoming the editor of my paper and getting a name on television. And, my name was the brand that I wanted to build. And I came back to Delhi and I was standing outside the press club trying to find out if any other journalists had been killed or attacked. And at that time there was Doordarshan. And someone from Doordarshan stuck a mic into my face and they said, what happened? And I said, I was killed by these people who had a psychopathic gleam in their eyes and they were attacking women and journalists, and that party was called the BJP. And it went all across the country, after which I was attacked in many different ways. I was stalked. My car was vandalized. I got hate calls. That time there wasn't the days of the internet, luckily. But all of the other happened and people said, where are her scratch marks? She's doing it for publicity. I would go to parties and people who supported the BJP would stop talking to me and go away. And, they were my friends and relatives. But the one thing which I learned from that was I took a stand and I gained an education. And that education has given me hope because I've got a bigger world to deal with now, which is kind of fun. So being an activist has been fun and it's been very, very hopeful. So hope is possible in any moment, any moment.
One thing,
We have room for last question.
yeah, I am fully in agreement with you.
Sir, आपके पास सवाल
सिर्फ सवाल ही है.
पूछिए.
वो ये कहना चाहता हूँ कि why this fraternity which you have said right now, भाईचारा, मेरे पास उसके लिए लफ्ज़ भाईचारा है, and why this hope or the world hope are far removed from those people who are at powers, who are ruling the roost.
Harshab, would you want to take this call?
No, they have come from us. They have come from within us. I think that, again, I would like to say that let's not externalize the problem. Let us recognize that we are part of the problem and we have to then deal with becoming part of the solution. It was not that Mahatma Gandhi and the idealistic period of India's life, people were different. It was, the leaders were different. It was that we, as a society, were more idealistic. We believed in the possibilities and the importance of justice and equality. I think if there's one thing that I'd really like us to take away, when you see a child who's sleeping on the streets when you drive out of this thing, at least let us feel that that child actually deserves a life no different from my own child. If you believe that more strongly enough, you will then get the leader that you want.
There's not time for more questions, but I'll be standing here and I will also be going to the bookstore to sign books of my new anthology called River of Flesh, The Prostituted Women in Indian Short Fiction. So you can talk to me. I'll be around here for 1 more hour. But I just want to mention as my last 2 sentences, that there's a big debate going on in our country about tolerance and intolerance. Harsh and Mudar have both raised questions about going beyond tolerance and being empathetic. And I just appeal to you that dream of a country which Tagore wrote about, where the mind is without fear and the head is held high. And into that country you want to awaken, but you have to create it. Nobody else is going to create it. So to answer that question about what about those people in power, the people in power will be what you want them to be.
Absolutely.
So you have to force the debate. And, India has always responded to people forcing the debate. So if you don't want them, start challenging them, start speaking up. Don't let them be the spokespeople for you all. You can be your own spokesperson and you can create small little movements. Gandhiji was once asked, when India became independent by Mountbatten, that Mr. Gandhi, how did you create such a big movement? So he said, I did not create a movement, I joined movements. So all of you can create movements which we can join. And we can get rid of the people who are perpetrating hatred, lies, and go for a country which is based on love. I would use the word love. And as you leave, try to talk to one person you don't know. Maybe you'll find a friend, a lover, a comrade, a fellow traveler, somebody. So try in this audience to talk to at least one person before you leave this place.
Thanks, Harshab. Thank you very much. Thank you, Ruchira. Thank you, everyone.